Hello everyone and welcome to the first episode of our second Let's Learn series for Victoria 3. Now, following on from the first Let's Learn series where we took a one-state minor power of Serbia and built it up to be able to take on the Ottoman Empire and unify the Serbian people, in this series we will be playing as Portugal and trying to restore that minor power by kind of the early beginnings of the 19th century into a major power that it once was and rightfully deserves to be. So hopefully this will be a slightly bigger challenge, given that it is a bigger economy, it is a naval power, and therefore we'll have, I think, quite a bit more exposure to the diplomatic game and into the naval game, and probably even more exposure to the military game as we try to build up our economy to be able to support a global empire, and then building up our army and navy to be able to project our influence across the world, challenge either minor and major powers, and develop ourselves into a true global player. Let's go ahead and jump into a new game, Iron Man mode. And just before we begin, I guess two things, guys. I won't ask this every episode, but if you enjoy this episode, please give it a like. It helps to get the first episode out. And second of all, there were quite a few, well, not a few, but I guess not quite a few, but a few requests for increasing the size of the interface from previous playthroughs. So it used to be at 150%, now I put it up to 180%. Let me know it's still not big enough. I have tried going with 200%, but it kind of makes me scroll through every menu. It's a bit too big. But let me know. Let me know if this is still not big enough or if the text is still not legible. So let's go ahead and start an Iron Man game. And again, kind of the word of warning. First of all, guys, is the first 4 episodes are going to be quite slow because we will go over kind of Victoria 3 in general. What is the game? What is the game about? And we will go slowly over the nation of Portugal and the key mechanics for the economy, both domestic and international, and for politics, again, both domestic in terms of interest groups, government, and the laws and what they are, how they're enacted, and international for diplomacy. In this episode, we will just get ourselves started, hopefully by the end of the episode. So let's begin with an overview of Portugal, and here's a brief historical kind of setting. And it has been just 2 years since the end of the Portuguese Civil War, and once again Queen Maria II sits on the throne. Portuguese colonies stretch across the world. Now that the internal strife has been dealt with, what will the rest of the century bring? Indeed. Let's go ahead and create our Iron Man save and get into it. So, first of all, let's just do a quick overview of what is the nation of Portugal in 1836. Now, we are a minor power, right? Countries of minor power rank are pawns in the imperialist game of major and great powers. We often use them as buffer countries, puppets, or captive markets, right? Minor powers gain the following benefits. We get 600 influence, right? +1 declared interest, some maneuvers during diplomatic play, and 1 potential agitators can appear in our country. We're at 20 rank in the world by prestige. That is what makes us a minor power. It's the amount of prestige we have versus what everyone else has. So at the start we have 53 prestige. Prestige arises from our country tier of kingdom, and then it's kind of further increased by the size of our economy, i.e. our GDP, gross domestic product, as well as our army and naval projection, and being the leading producer of certain goods. So we are number 2, number 3 producer for coffee and dyes respectively, gaining us additional prestige. And then, of course, there are sort of percentage bonuses from interest group penalties. Right now, Intelligentsia are posting social critique of us and therefore giving us -10% penalty to prestige. But we do have romanticism unlocked. There is a tech, an art movement celebrating the emotional and imaginary in contrast to the proper and rational. Depictions of nature, history, and dramatic, emotionally powerful scenes are common. And that gives us +5% to prestige. If we move up to 72 prestige or over, we'll become a major power with certain benefits. Right? And major power gives us more influence, 3 maximum declared interest as opposed to 2, 75 maneuvers during diplomatic plays. We'll talk about that later. It gives -25% loan interest, which is base 20% for everyone. So we'll probably reduce that by 4 percentage points. gives us 2 potential agitators and 10% migration attraction. So it would be very nice to get to a major power. We're pretty close now, but we will fall behind, I think, at the start, as we are generally a bit behind economically. So we'll need to do some catch up. So if the prestige falls below 15, we'll become an insignificant power, which will obviously remove many of these benefits, and in addition introduce 25% loan interest penalty, minus 25% migration attraction. So there we are. A minor power of rank 20. We have 10 battalions for an army projection of 225. We have 7 flotillas for a navy power projection of 125. Our GDP is 3.5 million almost, £0.50 per person. So kind of up there. Yeah, I think we're a solid minor power at the moment. Kind of, I would say even the upper end of the minor powers. We have a 6.5 million population, growing at a paltry 0.1%. We're going to have to deal with this. And yep, right off the bat, I guess as we start kind of the strategic planning of our nation, this stands out immediately. We would like to have this at, I'd say, about 0.7 to 1% ideally. If we can get it to something over 1%, I'd say that would be great. That's what we should be aiming for, but 0.1 is pretty low. Now, 2.9 million of our population live in incorporated states, which are kind of core states where our government has full reach, and the population is serviced by the government and is taxed by the government, and we provide our institutions to these people. And at the time we tax them, but the people living in incorporated states have participate fully in our political system. Now, we don't have any voting, but right now our political system is really based on wealth, right? The government listens to those who have wealth, and that is what incorporated population means. Unincorporated population is population living in unincorporated states, which are probably former colonies that have been fully colonized, or colonies that are actually expanding and colonizing a particular state. Unincorporated population, what does that mean? That means the pops there are not taxed, they're not provided with our whatever state institutions we have, such as healthcare, education, policing, etc. So we don't spend any bureaucracy on them, but we also don't tax them. They also have penalties to kind of higher end manufacturing industries, but depending on our laws, might have bonuses towards basic resource and kind of agricultural production. There you go. We have gainfully employed at 550,000. Peasants we have 1 million of. This is a special class of people who effectively, the global economy is derived at the beginning, at least, from peasants, right? Because they live in the countryside and effectively create, by paying themselves a wage and kind of taking some profits, they create a bunch of basic goods like grain, clothes, furniture. They create a little bit of everything. They're very inefficient in actually making those goods. And so pretty much kind of represent the medieval kind of structure of society where, people just lived in villages and produced everything they themselves need, maybe a little surplus of things they might trade, and that is kind of the basic economy. And if you think about, Victoria III and generally the 19th century, the process of industrialization is one of specialization of labor, right? It's moving away from villages, mostly into cities, or kind of resources, maybe like mines, etc., or even organized agriculture, like big farms, and right, using less labor but adding capital to it, so tools, and machinery to produce more goods, right? Making generally, doing more with the same population, right? That is the general process of industrialization, specialization of labor. Peasants are not specialized, they just kind of try to do everything, both to support themselves and their needs, both, housing, clothing, heating, and maybe trade just a little bit with others for, a little bit extra for liquor and tobacco and such. Now, we do have 73,000 unemployed, and we have 4.9 people dependent. So all population in Victoria 3 is divided into workforce and dependents. Generally, this ratio is 25% of any pop are in the workforce, and about 3/4 are dependents. This does change a little bit for pops like aristocrats, where only 20% are in the workforce and 80% are dependents. Generally speaking, people who are gainfully employed at this historical period were working age males. who are able, right? And whereas dependents are mostly women, children, elderly, and disabled. Now, important to note, doesn't mean dependents are not entirely unemployed. They just work in kind of little part-time jobs or lower wage jobs. So they represent kind of supplementary income, but they do provide some income to the POP kind of family, if you want to call it that, POP groupings. But the bulk of income, right, the bulk, and I'm talking like, 70%, 60, 70% at least, comes from the breadwinner, again, during historical period. It's typically, though not necessarily always, a working age, able-bodied male. So that's, just interesting, just for an overview, kind of setting the scene for our population. This is our population. So we will, and again, from this, I would immediately say, okay, we need to deal with the 73,000 unemployed, because unemployed people are starving and dying out, and that is probably what's dragging down our pop growth. And we need to increase this pop growth, because ultimately, once we build up our industry, although we do have 1 million peasants that can be upskilled, so to speak, and can migrate to urban cities and kind of mines and work those buildings, getting a higher wage and increasing their standard of living. We have plenty of labor. We do want to increase population growth, because in the long run, and I'm talking 50, 70 years into the game, we will be limited by population, as any economy will be, and ultimately our power will depend on the size of our population, and how much industry we can build, and how big our GDP can be, how much tax revenue we can generate, which we will use to support our army and navy, right, and project our power onto the world and onto others potentially, and win any conflicts and advance our own interests, most likely at the expense of other major and great powers. So there we are. Our literacy is 25%, so generally about 1 in 4 of our people can read, not bad. We'll talk about literacy in more detail, but broadly speaking, it helps within technology by increasing the spread of innovation from other nations and allowing us to build up universities and provide more directed research into a specific tech we want to pursue. On the other end of the kind of coin, it does reduce birth rate as people become more literate. They obviously kind of focus more on having fewer kids and educating them more. And in addition, higher literacy rate makes increases the POPs' minimum expected standard of living, making it harder for us to maintain, or making it harder for them to keep them loyal and less radical, because if their standard of living falls below their minimum expected, they will start become radicalized at quite a fast pace. So that is the flip side of literacy, right? Lower birth rate and higher expected standard of living, right? And the benefits, more tech spread. And there we are. And this counts. So 740,000 of 3 million in our incorporated states are literate. Now, if we also factor in the unincorporated states, which are probably mostly our colonies around Africa and Southeast Asia, our literacy rate is actually about 18%. But it's really the incorporated that really matters for the things I just described. Although for the population growth rate, this matters as well. But for tech spread, it's mostly about incorporated states. Now, average standard of living is struggling. Not doing too great. Now so lower, middle strata and upper strata, so all POPs work professions, right? In Victoria 3, such as peasants, clerks, laborers, machinists, aristocrats, capitalists for upper strata, or things like farmers, engineers, clergymen in the middle strata. Each strata has a base minimum level of standard of living. It is 5 for lower strata, 10 for middle strata, and 15 for upper strata. Now, these can be dragged up and down. They can be dragged up by increasing literacy, or dragged down by POPs living in unincorporated states. I guess maybe being discriminated against as well, but I think it's mostly them living in unincorporated states. So these are kind of skewed a little bit in various directions here. Our state religion is Catholic, and our primary culture is Portuguese, which is Iberian, Lusophone, and has European heritage, clearly. Catholic has the trait Christian, which is important, so we're close to Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox, and Oriental Orthodox religions. Obviously, not quite close to Islam or Buddhism or any of the animist religions in kind of Africa and other indigenous tribes. So there we are. That's kind of our overall overview. We're a monarchy, right? This is a government type where power rests mainly with the king or queen. this government adopts hereditary transfer of power. So whenever Queen Maria de Braganca here, a historical character, she's only 16, so she will likely live for a long time. And she has traits persistent, or 20% character health, so she's likely to live for a very long time. But she has, so she does support interest group intelligentsia. She's a reformer. She supports propertied women, compulsory primary education, and cultural exclusion, as opposed to other things. So this leader wants to make a few incremental changes to make society just a bit more equal, but not too much. Interesting, she's Catholic, obviously. Popularity is neutral. That's who she is. So we're likely to be stuck with her for quite a while. And in our government, we have the landowners and intelligentsia ruling our nation. Now, that's kind of it for a broad overview. Let's perhaps, just go over some of these key kind of tabs, and I will start with population just to understand what does our country look like thematically, and we will explain why when we look through politics, and other areas. So let's have a look at just in charts, again, broad strokes. By profession, most of our population here, 61% are peasants, plus another 26% are laborers. So that's together 86% of our population, right? So that's 4.7 million are peasants and laborers here, right? And then we have clergymen, some farmers, clerks, shopkeepers, and aristocrats. A few servicemen from our army, bureaucrats, machinists, officers, engineers, not many at all. In terms of political strength, however, it's really the aristocrats that hold half of the political strength or political power in our nation, right? Notice the discrepancy. 2% of population holding 50% of political strength. Why? I will explain in a bit. Broadly speaking, political strength, because we don't have any voting, it's really dependent on wealth. And we'll go over that when we go over individual pops in details. I will talk about that. But broadly, aristocrats are very wealthy, and right now, political power rests with those who are wealthy. Shopkeepers are number 2, even though there is actually only 122,000, 20,000 more of them than aristocrats, but it's also another 1.9% of population. Together, these guys are barely 3.5–4% of population, but they hold 59, 69, so 70% of political power, right? So, but shopkeepers, you'll see 3 times less political power than aristocrats, even though it's about the same population, only 500,000 or 18%. Next, we have clergymen with about 10%, bureaucrats 7%. Again, they're roughly, clergymen actually have, almost 2.5% of our population. It's quite interesting, but I guess not atypical of the time, but interesting to just note how the game represents this. In terms of cultures, we're 50% almost Portuguese, just shy of 50%. We have 8.5% of Fulbe, 6–8% Marathi, Fulbe being West African heritage, Marathi being Southeast Asian, India, so probably Indian heritage, and a whole bunch of other minorities from our colonies around the world, I guess. But in terms of political strength, Portuguese obviously hold pretty much all of the political strength in the country, 94%. Why is this? This is due to discrimination. Our policy we're currently running, we'll see that in law's national supremacy, which means we discriminate against everyone who is not Portuguese. We also have freedom of conscience as our religious policy, which means we discriminate against anyone who is not Christian, really. So either Catholic or Protestant. Protestant. We will see in a bit. Sorry. So whoever shares our trait, as we just see. So anyone who's Christian, we accept. Anyone who's not Christian, we are against. So Catholics, Protestants, Orthodox, and Oriental Orthodox, we are okay with. And given obviously all these minorities that live, across our colonies, most likely, we're discriminating heavily against them. And when we discriminate against POPs, it means their political strength is significantly reduced. They are also most likely of the lower strata and not very wealthy. Again, therefore, not not having a lot of political strength anyway. That's it. In terms of religion, we are 59% Catholic, 22% animist, yep, given that we have quite a few colonies, well, most of our colonies are across Africa. But we do also have Sunnis, Mahayanas, so Buddhist, and Hindu as well. Political strength, of course, again, lies with Catholics. Why? Because it's mostly the Portuguese that are Catholic, and Portuguese are wealthy, and they're not discriminated against, right? That's how this works in broad strokes. We'll look at detailed list later. So that is our nation, that is our culture. Now let's go and have a look at our politics just very quickly. Now the overview screen is not too useful yet, so we'll just jump ahead to the government screen. So again, Queen Maria de Bragança, she's part of intelligentsia. We have landowners and intelligentsia ruling the country. We have Catholic Church, armed forces, and petite bourgeoisie in opposition. While rural folk, industrialists, and trade unions are marginalized. Again, I will go over what all this means in detail as soon as we kind of just get a little bit into the game. Right now, the only thing I will do, so before we unpause, is I will stop suppressing the Catholic Church. In fact, I will bolster the Catholic Church. We will also bolster petite bourgeoisie. I will explain why, but I just want to set this so we can actually just finish up our overview and continue, try to unpause the game in this episode. In terms of our laws, so we have monarchy, oligarchy, we have national supremacy. And let's go from the top. So we have a monarchy, a form of governance where an aristocratic dynasty represents the country's national identity and yields executive powers to the royal head of the dynasty. This gives us authority, legitimacy from including head of state and government. That's why we have intelligentsia in there. But it gives us more penalties to government ideology. Again, I won't go into all of this in a lot of detail right now. But also gives 25% political strength to aristocrats. So apart from having our, we have very few aristocrats, but they're very wealthy, giving them a lot of political strength. But also, we just give them straight up 25% bonus on top. So no wonder, right, they have more than half of the political power in our nation. And that's due to the monarchy. Obviously, aristocracy benefits from that, given they are part of the ruling or the blue-blooded, so to speak, class. Now, distribution of power is an oligarchy. So we have the head of state shares power and responsibility with a small group of powerful, unelected individuals. Right, so there's a bit of power sharing. Autocracy would be, something like just an absolute monarch, like Russia right now would have monarchy and autocracy. But this again gives us some authority. It gives us kind of legitimacy a bit of extra legitimacy from including our head of state's interest group in government, which is intelligentsia. Gives us +2 government size, which means we can actually include more interest groups in the government without any penalties. Gives us actually a bonus -10% to government ideology penalty. So we can have interest groups with divergent interests, or can handle that better, having them all in the same government. Now, but again, aristocrats gain +50%, another 50% to their political strength. Capitalists gain 25% in political strength. I don't think we have any capitalists right now. But again, this is what makes our aristocrats so strong. It's really the oligarchy. Now, we're national supremacy. And again, foreign cultures are discriminated against unless they share both heritage and language or other customs. And this is what I just mentioned. So our heritage trait is European heritage, right? So Portuguese. We have here European heritage, and we are Lusophone, right? And we're Iberian. I think this is more like a language. So Galician, Basque, Spanish, Catalan, and Portuguese sort of share this trait. And Lusophone, it's present in Galician, Portuguese, Brazilian, Sulista, Nordestino, Amazonic, Paulista, and Afro-Brazilian cultures. So yeah, not surprisingly, given Brazil used to be, I guess, our colony some time ago. Now, what this actually means, really, is okay, we get some authority. We're basically discriminating against anyone who is not of European heritage and of either Iberian or Lusophone cultural traits. In our nation, that practically means we're discriminating against anyone except Portuguese. Discriminating means that those pops are, well, we make them unhappy, but on the positive side, I guess, for us, their political strength is greatly reduced. And so it doesn't really matter what people in our colonies say, given they're also unincorporated. But if we incorporated those states, it still wouldn't matter a lot. We are kind of oppressing them and dismissing their opinions and kind of their view of how this country that they have come to be part of through our conquest or colonization should be run, right? We just kind of don't care. We only care about Portuguese. Church and state policy is freedom of conscience. The state has an official state religion, but the people may choose what to believe. Only particularly exotic religions are discriminated against. Again, we accept, because of this, we accept religions that share a trait with state religion. Our state religion is Catholic Church, right? Its trait is Christian, so any Christians we accept. Anyone who's not Christian we do not accept. We have appointed bureaucrats. Bureaucrats are appointed by rulers to serve the country's best interests in exchange for high wages, which gives 25% political strength to bureaucrats and gives us 25% taxation capacity. Again, we'll talk about this in more detail. We have a professional army. Again, we won't talk about that too much right now, but I think it's enough just to know, as thematically, the army consists of well-trained professional regulars. We don't have any home affairs. The state makes no special attempts to put a stop to unrest and uprisings. And so this is kind of one set of laws that govern our power structure. In terms of our economy, right? Our economic system is interventionism. To ensure the stability of our nation, government must curb the worst excesses of private businesses. And that lets us subsidize any building and allocates 50% of our construction to the private sector. We will see how that works again as well, and I'll explain that in more detail. Our trade policy is mercantilism, an export-focused economy with an emphasis on keeping a positive current account and competing with other nations. Right? What does that mean? This basically sets the level of tariff on imports and exports, as well as we can kind of prioritize certain goods for imports and exports, which removes one type of the tax and applies a much higher version on the other. So, for example, if we encourage exports, then we will penalize imports of that good and basically drop any tax on exports, making it more attractive to foreign markets. Again, we'll go in all of this in more detail. These are all pretty big, chunky, kind of mini tutorials in themselves, each one of these laws. Now we are going with land-based taxation, a traditional form of land-based taxation collected mainly from the peasantry. So these are our taxes. There's obviously 5 levels. We're currently at the medium, kind of normal tax level, which means we tax income, like wages from POPs. 7% of that we take as tax. If we have any consumption taxes, we levy 35% of their value, and we have a flat 0.7 pounds tax, land tax, on every peasant. So as we saw, we have 1 million peasants, and peasants are subsistence farmers found only in subsistence building, where they produce agricultural and simple manufactured products they use mostly for their own needs. They rely on subsistence output for survival and play only a limited role in the market economy. They tend to be politically unaligned. So again, this is the most basic kind of medieval, almost times, remnants of the medieval times kind of economy. Right? This is where the initial kind of goods come from in Victoria 3. So this is our tax policy. We're mostly taxing, flat tax on peasantry and a little bit of an income tax and some consumption tax. Our land reform, in terms of how land is distributed and worked in our country, is governed by tenant farmers law. Agricultural land is owned by hereditary elites still, right? All land. Workers are not tied to the land and may seek alternative employment if they can find it. That gives 25% political strength to anyone, to the landowner's interest group. So basically anyone who supports it, which is mostly aristocrats, but could be clergy as well. In fact, we can just hover over and see, so 67% of our aristocrats support landowners, and clergymen also support, 20% of clergy supports it, and even 11% of farmers support landowners. So however many pops support this interest group times their wealth, which is then given a further 25% bonus. And you remember, from monarchy and oligarchy, our aristocrats, 60% of whom support landowner interest group, right? Aristocrats is a profession. So whoever's an aristocrat gets a 50% bonus, plus another 25% political strength bonus from monarchy. So that's 75. They then support, 60% of them support landowners, which itself gains another 25% bonus. So you can see why landowners are so powerful, because aristocrats are few in number, yes, but they are wealthy. They kind of benefit from monarchy and oligarchy, and on top of that, they support landowners mostly. That's just their natural inclination. And landowners benefit from owning all the land. So obviously, the government has to listen to them, right? They hold kind of the keys to the land, as represented by this icon even here. So let's keep moving our economics. Now, in terms of our overseas territories, colonization is currently governed by colonial exploitation. Colonies are established to exploit the area for their natural resources and cheap labor. This is what I briefly touched upon, and we'll talk about in more detail, which basically means unincorporated states suffer, from a few penalties, like your lower wages, lower subsistence output of peasants. So peasants kind of suffer. Their manufacturing industries aren't very efficient there. There's less tension decay. Tension is something that's generated while we're colonizing. Obviously, the indigenous people are ruffled by whereas kind of white Europeans coming over and starting to take over their land. Under this law would generate effectively, net would generate more tension, although it does say minus 25% tension decay. The tension decays slower, and as we colonize, we build tension, so net, we build tension faster. Once tension reaches a certain threshold, the indigenous people may attempt to drive us out of their colony, and we'll have to fight them. On the kind of positive side, colonial exploitation does give us 20% throughput to rubber, forestries, mines, and plantations. So kind of basic industries basically work 20% better. For now, we'll stick with that explanation. Again, I will explain in detail later once it becomes relevant. Policing, we have a local police force. This country has local police forces operating, right? What does that give us? Again, landowners gain a further 10% political strength. But we do get minus 20% state penalties from turmoil. This is for every level of of a law enforcement institution. We'll have an institution in a bit, but broadly speaking, some of the laws, although not all, unlock institutions, which are sort of benefits we provide to the population, or so things like healthcare. So, for example, here police. The next one is schools, and then healthcare, and there's a few others. They range from level 1 to level 5. Right, and as we move from level 1 to level 5, we gain per level benefits. Here we gain per level 10% political strength bonus to landowners. Again, no surprise, our landowners are so powerful. They hold 50% of political clout in the country. But we do benefit from reduction in turmoil. Turmoil is basically pops. When a significant number of radical pops is concentrated in a single state, they cause turmoil, so sort of riots, and all sorts of kind of disorder, which affects the throughput of building, and in general the life in the state becomes difficult. Right, police helps to quell that. Again, we'll talk about all of that in more detail when it becomes relevant. Now we have religious schools operating in the country. Letting the church take care of state education ensures a loyal and morally healthy population. What does this give us? Well, it gives 10% bonus political strength to Catholic Church, so those increasing their political clout, right? It gives 10% education access, which means, generally literacy of each pop gravitates towards its maximum education access over time. Education access is provided by techs. Again, we'll look at that in more detail, which techs, plus things like a schooling institution, right? So this kind of means that all of our pops should have access to about 10% education. So all of our pops over time will gravitate towards 10% literacy. And it's probably higher still in our nation because we have some techs unlocked as well. And it gives us 20% conversion. So pops do convert religions. They also convert cultures too. Again, we'll talk about how. But effectively, it's sort of a base value. I think it's 0.1% or 0.4, something along those lines. So it's not a lot, but this increases it by 20%. So we will slowly gain more and more Catholics over time, because we will gain them anyway without this institution, but this institution gives a further 20% bonus. In terms of our health system, we have charitable organizations, often religious ones, provide some help to anyone who is sick or dying to the degree they're able. Now, this enables health system institution. We'll have a look at in a second. And currently we have charity hospitals running, operated by the Catholic Church, giving them, again, some political strength. It also raises the standard of living for the lower strata by 0.5 point. Quite nice. We'll talk about what standard of living is and why it matters in more detail. But this is generally a good thing, and what we're trying to engineer through all of our kind of the buildup of our economy is raising the standard of living of our pops. We get minus 10% pollution effects reduction. This is from dirty kind of industry, which we don't have a lot of, so it doesn't really do much for us right now. It also reduces mortality rate for our pops. Just a flat, it says 3%. This reality means 0.3. Again, we'll look at that in more detail. But basically very nice, a flat reduction in mortality. And population growth is the result of birth rate, less mortality, right? So either we reduce mortality or increase birth rate. Together, the net differential is population growth rate. It is different among each pops. It depends on quite a few things, including standard of living, literacy, working conditions in certain industries, and I guess institutions like healthcare. So there we are. This is how our economy is governed, right? In terms of kind of human rights or social rights, sort of institutions, we can quickly go this free speech. We are currently under censorship. There's active censorship of the press and no guaranteed right of assembly. It gives us authority, allows us to more effectively bolster or suppress interest group. I will again show what that means as we play along, but you saw me just stopping our suppression of the Catholic Church and bolstering suppression, actually starting to bolster the Catholic Church and bolster petite bourgeoisie. This basically means pops are more likely, although it is not infinite, you cannot suppress an interest group completely, nor can you grow its clout indefinitely, but this does help us or let us influence as to where pops kind of allocate or flock to, which interest group they support and where their political strength flows to kind of over the long run or medium run even. On the flip side, censorship does give us minus 10% technology spread. Again, we'll talk about techs soon as well when we talk about research. In terms of our labor rights, we have no workers' rights. Workers have no particular labor rights guaranteed by the state. Children's rights, no legal restrictions are placed on where children may work. What does that do us? That gives 30% dependents income. So again, as I mentioned, dependents do provide some supplementary income to all pops. And this, obviously, if children are working, so there's an extra pair of hands. If you imagine a family of sort of a working age, able-bodied male supporting maybe a wife and 2 kids, could be a wife and a kid and his one of his parents or a disabled brother or something like that. But children work, and therefore dependents' income rises by 30%, quite a significant bonus. Although broadly speaking, the breadwinner again makes probably 67% of a family, so to speak, income. It does increase mortality, however, because having kids, in all these basic jobs that they are most likely to do, right? Because they will never have the qualifications to do higher end jobs. Obviously, these are all different. Farms, mines, manufactories, all of those, even peasants, accidents will happen and children will die, and sort of this is represented in the game by increasing mortality so this is for pops working in farmer jobs, right? So again, population growth rate is a differential between birth rate and mortality. Mostly these depend on standard of living, but there are other factors like literacy, but also just generally what different professions might have slightly different mortality rates. Now, rights of women. Women are legally under the guardianship of men and enjoy very few rights. So generally thought of, stay at home and raise kids, just do a little bit of supplementary income, kind of part-time little jobs. That's where dependent income comes from, but that does increase birth rate by 5%. It's actually 0.5, but the tooltip says 5%. Again, we'll talk about population growth in more detail, as this is very important to know what drives it and why and how do we can affect it. In terms of welfare, it is not the state's role to provide for those who cannot provide for themselves. Harsh, but that's 1836 for you. Only people of cultures. In terms of migration controls, so can people move around in our nation freely between states? Well, only people of cultures and religions not discriminated against may migrate, right? As we already talked about, we are basically the only people who are not discriminating against are Portuguese, and Catholics or Christians. Right? Portuguese Christians are people who are not discriminated against. So kind of our primary culture can migrate. Anyone else though, they cannot. They have to stay in the state, whether they're unemployed, starving. We're not letting them move around, right? That's how we are. And slavery, fortunately, slavery is actually banned. No human being may be owned by another. Well, at least we got that far by 1836. So there we are. That's kind of our nation. Let's go have a quick look at institutions. Brief overview of what are institutions. Effectively, as I mentioned, some laws, for example, colonial exploitation, police, education system, health system, also internal security, also welfare, also labor rights here will unlock institutions for us. They each have 5 levels and they give a certain effect per level. For example, right now these are locked. We will need techs. For example, we do want to, from our health system, as I already talked about what effects it has, we would want to raise that to level 2, right? There's, to be honest, no reason not to, because this health system only benefits our population. There's no drawbacks here at all, right? I mean, unless you are trying to suppress Catholic Church, obviously, but generally this isn't this kind of, you could see it as a bonus or potential malice, right? If you were trying to suppress Catholic Church. Otherwise, increasing standard of living for lower strata, just a flat increase is great. Minus 20% pollution effects is great. Reducing mortality is great. So we would love to move this to level 5. We cannot do that. Why? Because we don't have the techs. What do we need? The max level of this institution is due to just one tech that we have. We have medical degrees unlocked. Public health is greatly improved when those given responsibility for it are trained and certified in their fields, right? And that's it. So we will need to find another tech to improve our healthcare and reduce mortality, improve our standard of living, and therefore boost our population growth rate. That will be a great first step in our nation. That's probably the path we're going to take. Now, in terms of law enforcement, we actually do have level 3 available, right? Why is that? If we hover over the lock, it says the max level of this institution is due to 2 from bureaucracy. So we have a tech bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is the machine of government, the cogs and wheels that decide the efficiency of the state. That gives +2 max law enforcement institutions. And we also have law enforcement unlocked as a technology by default from the start. A professional force trained to set standard permits the state. A professional force trained to set standard permits the state to police its populace with increased authority. So we can increase this to 3rd level. What will that do for us? Well, that will give more and more power to landowners because, why is that the case? It's because we have a local police force law. So the way our policing is organized is through this law. If we switch this law, for example, to a dedicated police force, then each level would give a different set of benefits. For example, right, dedicated police will provide each level of institution, and we would keep our levels if we switch laws. But what we would get is minus 15% state penalties from turmoil per level, and minus 5% radicals from standard of living decreases. So actually quite I'd say a better overall. We'll talk about why, right? But ultimately, right, so we can switch between what benefits they give, but we also need to build up the levels. Right now, is it worth it? Well, we'll get more political strength to our landowners. We'll see if we want to do that or not. Right now, we can just say we don't know, right? And we won't do this. And then we also get minus 60% state penalties from turmoil. Again, I don't think we have any turmoil at the moment, so not really needed. On top of this all, you'll see at the top we have number of investment levels of 4 because we have 4 level 1s unlocked. It does cause bureaucracy to maintain each investment level. The amount of bureaucracy per level depends on our population. So you see, incorporated population of 2.85 million costs 28 per investment, right? So we do spend our bureaucracy. We'll talk about what these resources are in top left as well when they become relevant. But right now, bureaucracy is one of those resources. It is used to basically service our population in general and service them kind of for general purposes that are kind of abbreviated in the game, plus explicitly serve them with the institutions we have chosen to provide through our laws and through the level of that institution, right, to the extent to which that institution is provided. So for now, we can just conserve our bureaucracy given we don't really want these bonuses, right? So we don't need to increase that, although we could. It takes a year to build up to each, 52 weeks to build up to each level. Our education here also, again, we talked about provides education access. Again, we'll talk about literacy and whether this is a universal benefit or not, like health. I would say health, I would argue, is always beneficial. There's no drawbacks to increasing the health system. But for now, education system is locked anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Now, in terms of colonial affairs, right? So this only has one benefit, and that is plus 0.2 colonial growth generation, the amount of colonial growth generated by POPs in incorporated states. So the more population we have of our incorporated states, right, the faster we can obviously colonize, establish new colonies, which are in effect kind of a special type of unincorporated state, and the more we can just keep growing them. And again, I'll show you that mechanic in a second. But here, no drawbacks, right? So let's just go ahead. Other than spending a bit of bureaucracy, we do have 95 bureaucracy available. We do have already colonies, and we're in the process of colonizing Africa. Again, we'll talk about that in more detail. But I'll go ahead and just increase this, and you can see it's actually not 52. Sorry, I lied. So we've got 50 weeks to increase this to level 2. And again, no drawbacks other than consuming some of our bureaucracy, which we have some surplus of. So I think it's reasonable to do this. We're doubling our colonial generation, right? 0.1 going to 0.2. It's a slow process anyhow, but this doubles that process, so pretty good. So there we are. But right now we're 28 per level. We have 4 levels. We're spending 112 of our bureaucracy to maintain these institutions. In 50 weeks, this will move to level 2. Our colonial growth generation will go up. In fact, it will actually go up steadily over 50 weeks. We'll spend this 28 bureaucracy will kick in, and we will effectively have 140 bureaucracy. In 50 weeks, we'll be consuming 140 bureaucracy, but it will actually move slowly over the 50-week period. But the benefit itself will only kick in once the level of institution is fully established. But the bureaucracy cost we will take in gradually. So there we are. Sorry, going quickly, but that's just for the overview, right? So that's our kind of politics. Now let's have a look at our national budget. And luckily, we're currently in surplus of almost £2,000. Now, where does this surplus actually come from? So our national revenue, this surplus is national revenue less national expenses. Our national revenue is governed by, we're making 14,000. Where are we making it from? Mostly taxes. We're at normal tax level. Again, so we take 7% of our POPs' wages as taxes, 35% of for the consumption tax rate. Depending on the value of goods we actually choose to apply the consumption tax to. And we are taking just a flat absolute value of 0.7 pounds per peasant, right? And we got 1 million of those, right? Therefore, we take 0.7 from each one of them. Although, yeah, I mean, we can maybe go into detail in that calculation. Sorry. So the income taxes are applied to wages, so 1.46 thousand we're deriving from that. Poll taxes is 5.3 thousand, so that's a chunk of the biggest single source of national revenue. Consumption taxes, we're getting 2.4 thousand by taxing liquor and coffee, and we'll talk about that in a bit more detail. If it's a good thing, is this not a good thing, sensible, not sensible. But for now, we'll just stick with what the game starts up with. In terms of our tariffs, so wherever we're trading kind of importing and exporting various goods and taxing that. So that gives us kind of about almost 1,000. And so these are taxes, right? Tariffs, dividend taxes, consumption, poll taxes, income taxes, various types of taxes, all in addition to kind of depending on the quantum of population and their jobs and their wages. That obviously helps tax revenue, but also the level at which we tax. So we can go up to, for example, here 8.5% income tax, or even 10% income tax, or 50% consumption tax, or £1 per peasant of tax, right? And this is per week, remember? So we can actually translate this, because just in case you're wondering, if there's 1 million peasants, why are we taxing them 0.7 per peasant? Why is this not 700,000? Reason number one is because this is per week, right? So you have to remember that. And second reason is that it's not actually the 1 million peasants you tax, I believe. It is the 25% of the working age males, I believe, that we're actually taxing. But we'll double check that just to trace this calculation back to having 1 million peasants. Moving taxes to high or very high obviously increases our tax revenue. It will lower standard of living generally, because we're taking money out of people's pockets. It also has these additional malices like money stand legitimacy to our government. more radicals from standard of living decreases. Again, we'll talk, and 20% attraction of interest groups in government. So nobody likes the government that increases taxes, of course. We'll talk about all of this in more detail. Lowering taxes, right, gives a bit more, gives legitimacy. Obviously lowers the tax revenue, but gives legitimacy and reduces radicals from standard of living decreases. Now, after all the taxes are done, we can also mint. What is this? We get 500 from base value, and then 3,000 is basically our GDP. The reason being, in 19th century, most, if not all of the economies, I don't really know, but I assume it's probably all are on the gold standard. What does that mean? That means every piece of paper of money that you have, unlike today, what we have in the economy, is actually backed by a certain amount of gold. So, for example, the British pound would be sort of like 10 ounces of gold or whatever. That would be set, and therefore you could go to a bank and exchange your piece of paper for a piece of gold. That actually was possible, in fact, until sort of 1950s, let's say 60s, right? What does that do? That means government is limited in printing their money because they need the gold to back it up, right? That means the effect of that is that effectively as our economy grows, the government can print more money, and that's how it's represented in the game without incurring inflation. Generally, because you can't just mint money in the real world, and today, when money is not backed by gold, it's actually just a piece of paper that you believe it has value, and therefore it has value. Although it's also governed by how much money the government prints. If they print too much money, you get inflation or even hyperinflation. If you don't print enough, actually, you can get deflation as well. But that's all kind of abstracted from in the game, and the only thing you get is that the higher GDP, the more money you can mint, and therefore just simply growing your economy already helps your budget. Not even accounting for the fact that people are going to get better jobs, higher wages, and you'll tax them more. Government dividends can come from operating things like government railways and potentially even other buildings and making them profitable. Investment pool transfer, very important. We'll talk about that later. That's essentially the private sector paying for construction. Diplomatic pacts are things like reparations in case of any wars we won. Here it would be wars we won. Or an additional income can come from events and so on. Now, in terms of national expenses, we're spending 12,000. What are we spending it on? We're not constructing anything, so zero on construction goods. So this surplus in reality will go away pretty quickly once we actually start building things. Now, government wages. So we're spending to employ people in our government administration, in ports and in construction sectors, right? Because we have people there that are working. Government administration provides us with bureaucracy. Government administration buildings in our states provides us with bureaucracy and taxation capacity. They consumes paper as well, but we need to pay the wages of the clergymen, bureaucrats, and clerks working there. Our ports provide us with 20 convoys. They can also provide us with infrastructure as well, if we just switch a production method, I believe. But again, we need to pay the 500 laborers, bureaucrats, and clerks that work there. And the construction sector, likewise, gives us 2 constructions, so it speeds up construction of our buildings, but it obviously employs laborers, bureaucrats, and clerks that we need to pay for. Now, aside from paying wages to labor employed in government buildings, we also need to pay for the goods consumed in government buildings. What are we paying for now? We're mostly paying for paper consumed in government administration, right? So in order to produce that bureaucracy, as we just talked about, we don't not only need to pay the labor, we need to buy that paper for them. And this is a bit of a problem because paper is very expensive right now, and we'll have to deal with that. We also have to buy clippers so that our ports can actually operate, and we can actually trade with other nations. So this is just clippers are kind of little boats, merchant fleet basically. So there we are. Now, so let's look out for the government expenditures, military wages. Obviously, we're paying wages to our servicemen, so soldiers and officers, as well as sailors. We also have to buy goods for our military to equip our troops, right? Small arms for our soldiers, man-o'-wars. This is kind of general abstraction to, I guess, more like 18th, right? Maybe early 19th century ships, right? Kind of cannon, sail-powered cannon boats. We have no welfare payments. We're not paying any subsidies, not subsidizing any industries, not losing any money from government shares, so no unprofitable buildings that our government owns that will come in much later. No diplomatic pacts. We're not paying any interest since we haven't incurred any debt. no expenses from events, right? We can look by state situation. Doesn't really matter right now. Although, I mean, obviously, the Beira, Extremadura, and Alentejo, the 3 states in the core Portugal, is what's generating us revenue. In terms of our assets, we have some gold reserves right now. Investment pool will be built up. Again, this is a pretty big topic, very important. We'll talk about that. And here we have loans. Once we deplete our gold reserves, we'll start building up, basically borrowing on the kind of, I guess, domestic and international credit market. That's how it's represented in the game. We can borrow up to 2.69 million, which means we can basically spend quite a bit of time in deficit, depending, of course, on the size of the deficit. Borrow that money, we will have to pay 20% of that in interest every week. So quite crippling, to be honest. We'd probably want to avoid going into debt. So that's our budget, really. And to be honest, we have kind of 4 minutes left. But I think that's enough for the initial overview. I think maybe we make a cut here, and then in episode 2, we will go for, I guess, a more in-depth overview of each of our states, and what's in there. Where does our population actually live across our nation? What kind of industries we have? What kind of resources we have across each state? So which states are kind of more or less important? Where we have problems? Where are those unemployed pops that we need to urgently employ? And generally run over our kind of colonies. But right now, we obviously have 3 states. Maybe we can just quickly have a look here. In Portugal, we have the Azores and the Madeira Islands off the coast of Europe, so kind of Eastern Atlantic, just west of the European coast. We have Portuguese Gambia in kind of West Africa, I guess. Then we have North Angola and South Angola. We have Lourenço Marques colony. We have Portuguese Zambezia, and we have Portuguese Mozambique. It says Mocambique, but I always thought it's Mozambique. I think today it is definitely called Mozambique. But there you go. But then we also have a colony in Nova Goa in India. And we also have Macau in China. And we also have the Sunda Islands in Southeast Asia. So quite a few colonies. We do have the makings of a major or even a great power in us. It's just we've been kind of set back a little by these rebels here. We'll keep them in mind. We haven't forgotten. But first we need to kind of regain our footing, right? Regain our strength, and we'll see how we do that in the next episode. But I think that's it for this one, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something. This is the way, I guess the key lesson here, this is how you would go through whenever you start a playthrough over any new nation, just to understand, what are you working with, and hopefully this has given you a quick overview of, what law does what, how does the nation structured right now, and why do we have, that initial overview that I looked at the population, why, who lives in our country, and why is the political kind of setup is the way it is in terms of when we look at the government, right? What kind of laws are we running? I like to just look over it and give it like a flavor of how this country was run in 1836, what institutions we have, and why do they exist, and what do they provide to our people, right? And sort of why do we have these interest groups, and why some are marginalized? Hopefully you now understand. Rural folk, you can immediately tell, probably supported by peasants and kind of laborers, lower strata. Those are not very wealthy, therefore don't have a lot of political strength. In fact, they also a lot of them live in unincorporated states, and therefore almost completely excluded from the politics of our nation. And you'll see we have a few kind of less powerful groups here. Hopefully I've explained why landowners are just so powerful, and what we might potentially need to do to remove, or bring them down a notch, maybe redistribute the clout towards other groups. But there we are, guys. We'll make a cut here. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have, please do give it a like. It really helps the first few episodes just to get it out there and see, people want to watch it. I hope they will. Hope they will learn something. If you don't want to watch it, they don't want to. But it helps the YouTube algorithm to just give it more impressions and get the episode out there into the universe. But thanks a lot for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. 3 more episodes to come. Again, like I said, it will be a bit slow in the first 4 episodes, but I will go over all the key mechanics just so we understand what is happening, and then we'll probably go a bit faster from there. But again, thanks a lot for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something. Give it a like if you have, and I see you in the next episode. Bye.